Hello everyone, welcome to the final video of the year 2022. We're not even halfway through the clown decade yet, and I am dreading for what comes next. Because you know my old mantra by now, we are in the clown decade, things are only going to get worse before they get better. And one reason for that is because, effectively, we might see in the future a Labour government that lasts 50 years. And I do mean that. So let's not beat around the bush, let's get right into it. Millennials are shattering the oldest rule in politics. Western conservatives are at risk from generations of voters who are no longer moving to the right as they age. Because it's the old saying that I think is a leftist psyop: if you're not a socialist when you are younger, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. Which I think is just the most pathetic excuse for not instilling values in your children. But hey, I don't have children yet, so my mind is quite malleable on that idea. If you're not liberal at 25, you have no heart. If you are not conservative at 35, you have no brain, said Winston Churchill or US President John Adams or perhaps King Oscar II of Sweden. Variations of this aphorism have circulated since the 18th century, underscoring the well-established rule that as people grow older, they tend to become more conservative. The pattern has held remarkably firm. By my calculations, members of the Britain's silent generation, born between 1928 and 1945, were 5% less conservative than the national average by age 35, but around 5 points more conservative by age 70. The baby boomer generation traced the same path, and Gen X, born between 1965 and 1980, are now following suit. Millennials born between 1981 and 1996, god damn it, in this assessment I am a millennial, started out on the same trajectory, but then something changed. The shift has striking implications for the UK's Conservatives and US Republicans, who can no longer simply rely on the base being replenished as the years pass. And as we can see by the graphs provided, there does seem to be a quite consistent pattern with previous generations, where they are slightly to the left of the national average, and as they grow older, definitely become more conservative. But I do have a massive problem with this graph. As you can see, this is a vote share by age, and it is based on each election via the national average, i.e. the national average is the centre ground. The problem is that the centre ground has actually been going left over time. So really, when we've got a graph here that shows effectively the boomers being slightly more conservative than the silent generation, that's not actually true, because typically a silent generation conservatism would be completely anti-feminist. You know, I know people in the silent generation who would never trust a woman pilot, for instance, and yet pretty much every boomer I know would. So really, with this graph, there is a huge issue, and I'm going to try and make a quick mock-up in Paint that shows just how bad the problem is. So here I have done a bit of a weighted graph that shows each of the averages as we go through time. As you can see, the silent average is way above the boomer, Gen X and modern average, and over time that average has gone left wing to show that yes, the Overton window has radically shifted leftward. And not only that, the millennials are going way further left than any other generation could even dream of. And even as they get older, they get even more radically left wing. Because just from my perspective as a borderline millennial zoomer, all we have seen throughout our life is a very easy and prosperous childhood throughout the 90s and early noughties. You then get to 2008, as all these people are going through school and university and are about to get into the big wide world, and they are basically being told, oh, by the way, this is going to be way worse than anything you have ever seen before in your life. And all they've seen from a British perspective anyway is 12 years of Tory rule, even though most of these issues, I'd argue, stem back to Blair and Brown. But trying to convince people that the people that were in power for 12 years haven't been able to solve the problem, are the ones that are definitely going to solve it this time, is becoming harder and harder to argue, even though I am a Tory member. So there definitely needs to be some sort of change, because as you can see, this is just getting worse. And if we were to add the Zoomer generation in there, they would be even more left-wing than millennials, as plenty of evidence suggests, and I see absolutely no reason for Zoomers to go any more right-wing. Because this is what I am dubbing teenage rebellious Phasism. In other words, these people are struggling to become adults because they are finding it hard to buy a house and have kids, or even find the urge to want kids, as we will go through later in the article. It's not every day that concepts from public health analytics find a use in politics, but if you're a strategist on the right, then now might be a good time for a primer on untangling age, period, and cohort effects. Age effects are changes that happen over someone's life regardless of when they are born. Period effects result from events that affect all ages simultaneously, and cohort effects stem from the differences that emerge among people who experience a common event at the same time. The framework is used to understand differences in a population and whether they are likely to be lasting. This makes it perfectly suited to interrogating why support for the Conservative parties is so low among millennials and whether it will stay there. And this is where we find out that we're screwed, even though the Tories and the Republican Party are basically left-wing. Let's start with age effects, and the oldest rule in politics: people become more conservative with age. If millennial liberals' inclinations are merely a result of this age effect, then at age 35 they too should be around 5 points less conservative than the national average, and can be relied upon to gradually become more conservative. In fact, they're more like 15 points less conservative in both Britain and the US, and are by far the least conservative 35-year-olds in recorded history. Again, I am putting this down to the fact that they never got out of their teenage rebellious phase. And their recent memories of when things were going wrong were when the Republicans or the Conservative Party were in power. Whereas, for example, I recently went to a Conservative policy forum about capitalism. All the boomers loved the time when Margaret Thatcher was in charge, didn't like what Blair did, and then basically also they predicted the 2008 crash or knew something bad was going to happen, and everything that has been happening since then has been basically pushed from a socialist economic perspective. In short, they think Rishi Sunak is a socialist, and I just happen to agree with them because I guess I've done my reading. But I told this to my family. My brother then told his friends that he met through The Guardian. Yes, that is unironically what happened. And not one of my brother's friends could understand that perspective at all, which is another issue we have in politics, in that only one side can understand the other. But obviously, as Jonathan Haidt points out, the liberal types or the socialist types cannot understand the moral framework of conservatives. But that's another issue I'm not going to talk about too much. We're still on the rebellious Phasism. So, on to period effects. Could some force be pushing voters of all ages away from the right? In the UK, there has certainly been an event. Support for the Tories plummeted across all ages during Liz Truss's brief tenure, and has only partially rebounded. But a population-wide effect cannot completely explain millennials' liberal exceptionalism, nor why we see the same pattern in the US without the same shock. And yes, I still am pushing the idea that Liz Truss was basically completely brought down by the media. Because all this stuff on economic shock, there has been equally bad shock since then under Rishi Sunak's premiership, and yet you see nothing in the news about it. But as I say, we're in the clown decade. I shouldn't have got my hopes up for someone like Liz Truss to fix things. Things have to get worse before they get better. These millennials need to have their hand on the stove before they understand why you need someone sensible in. So the most likely explanation is a cohort effect, that millennials have developed different values to previous generations, shaped by experiences unique to them, and they do not feel conservatives share these. This is borne out of the US survey data by showing that, having reached political maturity in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, millennials are tackling much further to the left on economics than previous generations did, favouring greater redistribution from the rich to the poor. And that's the same over here in the UK, where millennials are more economically left-wing than Gen Xers and boomers were at the same age, and Brexit has alienated a higher share of former Tory backers among this generation than any other. Even before Truss, 2/3 of millennials who had backed the Conservatives before the EU referendum were no longer planning to vote for the party again, and 1 in 4 said they now strongly dislike the Tories. And I'm honestly surprised it is that low. But yet again, it is another media narrative. Brexit is going to absolutely destroy the country for absolutely everyone. The country does pretty well out of Brexit even now, even despite all the constant push that absolutely every economic problem in Britain is due to Brexit, even though similar economic problems are happening all around the world. I don't want to say it is effectively brainwashing, but you'll notice that even this article is pushing the idea of teenage rebellious Phasism, or TRP as I'm going to call it from now on, as it is constantly saying, conservative values, i.e. the values of older generations, are not being installed in millennials properly, and it is probably due, as it says here, to the economic disaster that was the 2008 crash, which governments appear to not be doing a good job of recovering from, because all they did to pay off the debt was print money. And in the UK specifically, a lot of millennials and Zoomers really do see themselves as internationalists. And honestly, a lot of people could say it's left-wing bias in the media and all that, and to some degree that's probably true, but really, I think it is just as simple as they don't like their parents' values of, we want Britain to be great, and not have our laws and rules dictated by outside bodies that we can't vote for properly. The data is clear that millennials are simply not going to age into conservatism. In fact, they're doing the opposite. To reverse a cohort effect, you have to do something for that cohort. Home ownership continues to prove more elusive for millennials than for earlier generations at the same age in both countries, with houses increasingly difficult to afford. A good place to start would be to help more millennials get on the housing ladder. Serious proposals for reforming two of the world's most expensive childcare systems would be another. And this is what I was alluding to before with the fact that millennials and Zoomers are finding it quite difficult to adult, and don't get me wrong, I am in that same camp. I still live at my parents' house, for God's sake. However, as the article says, I should be in a position where I can end up finding and buying a home with my girlfriend. But I'm not, because houses are ridiculously expensive at the moment. And it is a problem trying to tell boomers that, because I have told boomers that before, and a lot of them say, yes, well, buying a house was never easy. But then people in the silent generation above them say, oh yes, I just went to the bank and got a £200 loan and bought the house from that. Which obviously £200 was probably worth a few thousand in these days. But even so, adjusted for inflation, that is ridiculously less than it costs for a house today. And yes, immigration does have some issue with it, but really, planning reform is the way to go. We just need to build more houses. And yes, we can build in places that aren't outstanding places of natural beauty or green fields. But anyway, again, I'm going off topic. Build more houses, it will probably make millennials go a bit more conservative. UK millennials and their Zoomer younger cousins will probably cast more votes than boomers in the next general election. After years of being considered an electoral afterthought, their vote will soon be pivotal, without drastic changes to both policy and messaging that could co-sign Conservative parties to an increasingly distant second place. So as demonstrated, this is a problem for both the US and the UK. We have basically managed to get an entire generation to actually want to get more socialist, which in turn is probably going to genuinely make some sort of revolution, even if it is bloodless. I mean, we've obviously already had one with Tony Blair, but we're looking at probably getting another one that's even more left-wing and even more explicitly so. And I am not joking when I say this is basically just teenage rebellious phasism. This is just a bunch of people wanting to have different politics to their parents, effectively, partly because they generally don't think that those politics are good, but also partly because it's just almost mass hysterical groupthink. I mean, we've had a few classic examples this week of millennials being absolutely insane and constantly moving position just because they want to disagree with someone they don't like. A huge one being this example about trans kids in the US.
They're not doing surgeries on
all
kids
the studies we have into
18.
this.
You can't.
Yes,
no, they're not.
Yes, they are.
No, they're not. There is no doctor.
What's the basis for saying that?
I mean, already from the start, no, this is my position, therefore it must be true. You cannot perform any sort of surgery that is going to mutilate a person if they're under 18. The sensible centrist guys here have done their homework and obviously will have receipts of where this is actually happening.
The law, there's no doctor in the United States who will give you who will do an irreversible surgery under the age of 18. That's just not true.
Chloe Cole is across the street. She had her breast cut off at 15. You want to come talk to her?
Mastectomy is that's
You want to
happening
come talk to her?
Was it for cancer?
Boom, already 10 seconds in. Hey, we have a person here who had her tits lobbed off at 15. Instantly he's replying with shifting his position from it never happens, it is law, to oh well maybe they do it for some procedure that isn't to do with being transgender. In this case, did she have breast cancer?
Or was
No,
it for
gender.
That's not true.
Again, he goes back to it, oh no, it was because of a gender. Oh well, that's not true at all, it's the law, it can't happen. Bear in mind, I want you to watch this clip in the mindset that this is just a rebellious teenager. And he is seeing these right-wing people as someone akin to his parents, someone with sensible politics. And say this was a free market versus socialism debate between a parent and their kid, it'd be the same thing. Oh, I think we should have socialism, mum or dad. I think it's great. Mum or dad say back, oh, well, it ends up with everyone being miserable in poverty and in gulags. And instantly it will be either of those people deserve it, or it is a that is simply not true. That's always how it starts.
Come talk to her.
No.
I think that's my favourite part of it as well. I have politically engaged friends, and when we get in disagreements, we can have disagreements, but then when it actually comes to me trying to give them a source or a video of someone making my point and showing the evidence for it, I've unironically had one of my friends saying, no, I don't particularly want to change my mind. Which I think is the worst way to be if you're going to be politically active, but this is the standard for millennials and Zoomers. And this is exactly what he said here.
I've got video from Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, California, where the doctor is admitting that the youngest patient they've cut the breasts off of is 12 years old. It's on video, my friend.
I'm willing to bet you right now that that's an edited video where the doctor was talking about how the person had cancer, breast cancer, and had to cut it off.
Boom, again, it's like, yeah, I've got video evidence here, it's raw. And then essentially the reply is, no, it's a deep fake, it's not true. I mean, this is two separate bits of evidence here that he has given so far, and neither of them can be true to this guy because he simply cannot change his mind, because he effectively has the mind of a 14-year-old in his rebellious phase.
All right, so this is a video by Boston Children's Hospital.
In the United States. For top surgery, you are requested, but not required, to have been on gender-affirming hormones for at least a year. Many surgical centers require you to be 18 for top surgeries. We'll see people as young as age 15 if they've been affirmed in their gender for a long period of time. And don't really...
I mean, that is undoubtable proof that under 18s can have their tits lobbed off. And it's all coming across as, oh, well, this is reasonable. Listen to the music in the background. It's just informative. Yeah, you've had to have gender affirmation for a certain amount of time, which is just madness to me. You can only come and have liposuction if you have been affirming yourself as anorexic for 2 years. Honestly, all this trans surgery stuff, especially for people under the age of 18, is going to be seen in the same way as lobotomies in the future. I guarantee it. But what does this guy say when he's given the direct evidence?
So what are your thoughts about that?
That's fine to me.
Well, you said it's not happening, so it is though, right?
I was incorrect
Okay, so we're going to acknowledge that?
Yeah, I was incorrect about that for sure.
See, now it's moved. After 3 bits of evidence that all weren't true, he finally listens to a video and he says, oh yeah, that's fine. 15-year-olds having their tits cut off? Absolutely fine.
What else do you think you might be incorrect about?
Well, I'm sure plenty of things.
You were very confident about that 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, and you know, like any reasonable person, I can say
So
when I
now
was
do you
wrong.
believe that they cut off the breast of a 12-year-old at Kaiser Permanente? Or do I need to show you that video too?
Were they affirming to their chosen gender for a long time?
Oh, I love it. I love it. This is the thing. This is the thing. Have you heard what the experts are saying? Don't you know, say, if it's Brexit or something, don't you know that everyone I like, Ezzy Izzard was saying that we need to remain in the EU. Otherwise, we're going to have human rights abuses and everyone's going to be tortured in the UK. And as soon as he hears an expert say gender-affirming care, if they've had that, it's absolutely fine. That's his next line of attack. It's, okay, it's acceptable to lob off tits for cancer, which to be fair, it might be. Oh, no, if it's gender-affirming care, that should also be okay, so I'm going to push for that one instead. Either not realising or realising and wanting to push against the fact that doing any sort of mutilation like that is wrong, even though he said it's illegal before. I mean, now he says he's wrong about that, but now he thinks it's happening and now has to shift to saying it's okay because I like it and you don't.
The way they said they have to be in that video?
Well, they don't have to be. They request it.
That's it, as long as they have been.
No, in fact, you can get these letters of approval for surgery over the phone.
The guy's just stunned into silence now. He doesn't know what to say with all this because he knows that these people have done their homework. He knows that they will have evidence for all their claims now. So saying it's not true isn't good enough anymore. So he's trying to think, how can I say that this is a good thing, actually? How can I make my team look better?
There was a Pride Festival in Madison, Wisconsin a few weeks ago. Someone set up a tent with a sandwich board saying trans or non-binary, free letters of recommendation for surgery. You can just walk up to the tent, get your letter for surgery that you need.
I'm sticking off the graph again because I really want to nail this point home that this teenage rebellious phasism is what is causing this red line to continually go down. And the thing is, they don't even care who it hurts. They don't care if they're right or wrong. They don't care about that at all. They just want to do what they think makes them feel good. And to be honest, in most of the cases, it is just, is the authority on this subject left-wing? Do I like them? And if I do, I'm just going to follow everything they say. And that is effectively how teenage rebellious phasism works. It's a mindset of my parents or right-wingers like this particular figure or authority, so I have to hate them and dismiss everything they do. Oh, this left-wing authority is great, even though everything they say is morally reprehensible, as he was pointing out in the first place, but oh, the authority says it and this person doesn't like them, therefore I have to like them. And that's why, as the blue lines are all going up, millennials one is going down, because they are basically trying to be inversely proportional to their own parents and right-wingers' views. And yet they don't realise that they've been the ones practically in power in basically every major institution for some decades now.
Do you think that's the level of safeguarding we need for a lot of these kids who are struggling with other mental health comorbidities?
If they want to transition, then yeah.
Okay, so a second ago...
And that is the average run-through of teenage rebellious Phasism. They will say that any right-wing claim is either a conspiracy theory or just not true, or the right-wingers have yet again misunderstood something. The right-wingers will show them their receipts, and they go through them, start saying that's not true for the first couple. When you get to about 5 or 10, they start saying, yeah, it's true and it's a good thing. And I think this is actually why a lot of millennials are going more left-wing, as the graph shows, because they are simply allowing the radical leftists to take their mile, whereas conservatives have only been giving them an inch for the past few decades. And this is why, certainly in the past few decades, Cthulhu has been swimming left. But this can't go on forever. As I say, when the Tories have got in, they move slightly to the right of where Tony Blair was, and at this point they are way further left than they ever were, thanks to David Cameron, Theresa May, a bit with Boris Johnson, though he wasn't the worst, and now Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to want to do anything that will actually help the economy or the country. But there we go. But that was an example of an American being a moron. Now we're going to move back over and see what the average mainstream far leftist says today. Ones that are constantly invited to the BBC. Please do take it away, Ash Sarkar.
I say this with a really big caveat, and the caveat is I don't want to romanticize China. It's not a country I would like to live in. It's deeply authoritarian, and in many ways my sense of what freedom is has been shaped indelibly by growing up here.
Yes, Ash Sarkar is there saying a Chinese communist government would not be her ideal place to live, because they do indeed repress freedoms. And as she says, she doesn't want to romanticise China, and this is just like when idiots say, I'm all for free speech. There's a but, and then they go against everything they just said.
However, it feels like a state which does stuff.
And this is a massive problem I have with communists, but the problem I'm pushing forward here is that Ash Sarkar and all the friends at Navarra Media, they are the most mainstream and far left as you can go. And they are almost as bad as Diane Abbott, since the Communist Party of China these days is slightly less bad than under Chairman Mao. But still, they don't seem to realise that inevitably, if you have a state structure that allows for them to control absolutely everything in the economic sphere, that in turn is going to mean that they have to control everything in the human sphere, because they are effectively the same thing. The economy is nothing more than humans acting. That is all the economy means. So if there's full state control of that, then that means that there is full state control of human action.
Which has the capacity to do stuff. Okay, there needs to be a hospital built. We will do it in 8 days. There needs to be high-speed rail infrastructure. We will, practically cover one of the largest land masses in the world, the high-speed rail infrastructure, within the course of, a decade and a half.
Yeah, the problem with China doing these things is that because it's completely centralised and not based off any sort of economic law, you find that a lot of these buildings that they do build in a few days go completely unused, and then they need to destroy them a few decades later, and that's assuming that the ones that are used aren't collapsing on their own. The reason they do these things quickly is because they are not doing them properly, and because they don't do them properly, and because, as Ash mentioned before, there is a massive amount of authoritarianism that means that it's very hard to get videos out of China, we see these buildings either not being used because they're built in the wrong place, or if they are being used, they tend to collapse depending how quickly they've been built. And then, of course, we move on to the COVID pandemic, where stairwells were taken out of apartments to stop people leaving, and they've only just got rid of the zero COVID policy because people were getting mad that they couldn't do anything. So yes, it is a state that does stuff. It does a lot of bad stuff, which you can kind of say in Ash's defence. Okay, she did say that, but the problem is that the good stuff she's saying they have managed to do, it's also bad. It's also very, very bad. Yes, they do build hospitals in 8 days, and then it's either not used or it collapses. This is hardly the type of government you would want to emulate, and yet that's what everyone did for COVID.
I was speaking to a friend who recently spent a lot of time in Shanghai, and he said it feels like living in the future. You go to Shanghai from England and it feels like you are living in the future.
Yeah, similar things are said about Hong Kong and Singapore, and the main reason why is because Shanghai is one of the few places in China that actually has a free trade zone. In other words, it relies on capitalism. It doesn't rely as much on the state for its economic prosperity. That's one of the few places that China needs to make sure that it can build these absolutely pointless, massive infrastructure projects that either get underused or destroyed. And of course, it comes with all the bad parts of the Chinese authoritarian government, in which you don't have any freedom and you can barely get any videos out. Hence, Ash says this.
Now, again, I don't want to live in an authoritarian state. And me and you have discussed this a few times where I do think there's something inherently emancipatory about democratic participation. But I think about what some what the blossoming of certain kinds of choice and the restriction of other kinds of choice has done to Western societies.
I generally find it quite amazing how she can admit that China is authoritarian, say, oh, but Shanghai's like a city of the future, but no one wants to live there, and then somehow turn it back around and say, oh, well, let's think about the freedom we don't have over here in the West. But this is exactly what teenage rebellious phasism's all about. It's about, yes, admitting that there are some problems with these things, and then turning it around and either saying, well, it's a good thing actually, or saying, well, it's better than what we have over here if we're talking about foreign countries. Even though, as we can clearly see here, Ash does not prefer China, but still says it's better.
We have infinite consumer choice. What we have no choice over is the participating in consumerism, or an economy which is based on consumerism.
I don't even understand how you can say that. How can you say you can't participate in a consumeristic economy? I think the funniest part of this is that I have nicked this from Navarro Media's main channel, and on their main channel they actually have a store, and it is a store page that features abundant crap, basically. You've got bags that say Marx and Planet Communism on. You've got a hip flask that's got the Navarro Media symbol on. It's basically just a bunch of black and white stuff with a little logo put on. And they sell it for about 10 times more than it probably costs to make. And Ash Sarkar is here complaining that she can't participate in the consumerist economy, even though she is one of the purveyors, the main purveyors in fact, of the consumerist economy, and actually clearly spends a lot of her money on consumer goods as well. And I know I'm being the guy in the well saying, ooh, yet you participate in society. But the thing is, as she said, well, I prefer an economy like China's. I just don't want to go there because I get to shag whoever I want over here and get to take videos calling politicians nonces. And don't get me wrong, I can appreciate those freedoms, but my God, she doesn't understand that she's going to throw that all away and her whole livelihood away as soon as someone like Corbyn, whom she loves, gets in. And this is the thing, the millennials and the Zoomers, they want Corbyn back in.
I have infinite choices in terms of who I want to be, how I want to style myself, how I want to present myself to the world. But I don't have a choice about living in a society which takes care of people.
You actually do. She keeps pointing out, China does this stuff better. No, you actually do. This is the problem. These leftists, these millennials and Zoomers who can't grow up and are stuck in their teenage rebellion phase, they want everything. They just want everything that they think is good without realising that these things actually do come at a cost. You actually can't have everything. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's either a Chinese economy and authoritarianism or it's Ancapistan. Governments and economies are very, very complex things. But here's the thing, and for all I know, Navarro Media already do this, but they could actually send all the profits they make off their store and send it to a charity like Shelter or something. Yet you can just tell from the self-indulgence from Ash and all these people at Navarro Media that it's the old classic, they just hate the rich. They would have more shame being caught standing up to attention to God Save the King than they would if their hand was caught in the poor box.
And so again, it's not about romanticizing China, but I have that sense of real melancholy, actually, when I look at that kind of building project, when I look at that kind of state ambition, and I feel this immense sense of loss that we don't have it here.
Ash has basically just admitted that her ideal government is one that effectively allows people to do whatever the hell they want hedonistically and suffer basically no social consequences for it, but at the same time there's a bunch of railways and hospitals. It just doesn't seem like a fully coherent worldview. It's not a utopia really, is it? It's just, I want good things with no consequences. And again, this is what I mean. This is what people who are turning 40, by the way, this is how they are thinking. This is the usual average thing you will hear millennials say. Socialism isn't a dirty word to them, capitalism is, which is why I suggested the Tory party to start calling it free market economics rather than using the word capitalism, because it's just dirty to them. It's what they think the older generation want. Whereas, as you can tell, they like the word free, but the problem is that they're then just going to change tact and use a different word when the word free market becomes dirty again. And it's a shame, because you do have to get into that framework, but they have the overall framework of society at the moment, so, you know, work with what you're given. But not to blackpill you too much, but this is going to be the future. These things are going to get worse before they get better. You think we've reached the far left as they can get to now with millennials and zoomers? You've not seen anything yet. I would not be surprised if by the end of the decade you're seeing it normalised that kids are treated completely gender neutrally in classrooms. Despite the fact that the boys are going to be little, loud, ADHD-riddled monsters, and the girls are probably going to love it, because feminism says that they should be able to get away with quite a lot of things that they do. But there is a bright side to all this. If we do manage to make it through, and Labour doesn't make it completely illegal to be right-wing of Chairman Mao, then you are probably going to see the backlash of all backlash against this. It's happened before in Britain, it's how we got Margaret Thatcher. Let's just hope this time that the pieces are all in the right place to have someone who isn't as ditzy as Liz Truss. I would be very happy to see Kwesi Kwarteng back in the Treasury or even as Prime Minister sometime in the future. Or maybe even Kemi Badenoch. And if Steve Baker stops his optic cuckoldry at that time, I'd be happy to see him as well. But who knows, we're talking in decades' time, there could be an entirely different group of people trying to get into power in Parliament then. My fingers are crossed for someone who was effective as Margaret Thatcher was back in the 80s. It paved the way for the glorious 90s and early noughties, the ones that many millennial children will remember. And as for me as a Zoomer, I remember majority of it. But most of my upbringing has been going through recession after recession. And I'm probably going to go into another one. I was born at the exact right time, economically, to see the demise of productivity right before my eyes. Anyway, we're moving into 2023, the fourth year of the clown decade. Why not just go into it with a smile? I know this is a bit of a blackpilling video, but do as I do. Keep watching this stuff, find it funny for what it is, focus on your own home and family, and do what you can to make it the most pleasurable experience for yourself and your family and friends as you can. You come into life as an individual with a family around you and loving you, you should do your best for them. I know I am going to be doing that with my own New Year's celebrations. So, that is everything from 2022 from me. I will of course be back in the new year with more videos, more streams, and more of that entertainment that you come back for. Thank you very much for supporting me throughout the years for this. It is always very enjoyable to create videos and see your comments, either disagreeing with me, saying that you basically keep up with news through my channel, and say that I'm still doing good work. I don't have any plans to stop YouTubing anytime soon. I'm still going to do work for the Wellington Project, of course, as well, with regular streams every Tuesday there. And I will even be looking to write more articles for them. And of course, if you would like to do that, please just find the contact information on the webpage found in the description below. Anyway, as I said, that was everything from 2022 from me, Haryan Gláeddyv. So I'm wishing you all a very happy new year. And as usual, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.